Hi, this is Tony Ruggiero. Thanks for listening to The Tour Coach. These are the players, coaches, experts, stories, and insights from my work on the PGA Tour at my retreats or my downtown teaching center in Mobile, Alabama. My goal is to shed light and share insights from the people who I've gotten to know and meet working on the PGA Tour and teach it through my career. And I hope this helps all of us play, coach, and teach better golf. If you like what you hear, please give us a good review and take a look at our new Dew Sweepers YouTube channel or the Dew Sweeper on Instagram, where I've taken some time to share videos of help from my teachings, travels, and journeys. All right, everybody. Joining me here now on the Tour Coach, somebody that I had him on the radio show weeks ago. I didn't realize how long we'd known each other. It's made me feel even older. Good friend. He's been an important part of my development as a teacher for a long time, from my early days with Hank Johnson and down at Sandestin, I think was the first time that we met. Started shot by shot. Now he's with Swing U. Lots of insight into the numbers and the stats in the game of golf, and I've always been fascinated by some of the stuff that he's told me and he's helped me develop young players. In fact, we're using him more than ever now with the Elite Development Program that Colby Touye, Dr. Greg Carton, and I are doing with 10 folks as they've been putting their data into his system. And actually, Thomas Henderson, one of my young players, is in a qualifier today. I'm going to work with him tomorrow, and we're going to look at his report as soon as I pull into a parking lot. But, Peter, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing very well, Tony. Thank you.
Makes you feel old, realizing how long we've known each other, huh?
Only because I am old.
I'll tell you what, I was thinking about this last week before we did the little radio segment for WNSB in Mobile, and then this week as I was going through some stuff, and I was like, man, that was a long time ago. Some of those early HJ days. I remember that first, I think it was really, to be honest, maybe the first, I do these junior camps and retreats, and it's been such a big part of what I do. But I think maybe the first one we kind of ever did, Hank started those, was down at Sandestin. And I think you might have been one of the first guests, HJ, we ever had down there. I remember when we brought you down and we did some stuff with some of the young folks. So it's been a long dang time.
Yeah. I remember I did a presentation in the evening, but I also set up this putting skills test that we did, and the kids loved it. They I want to do that again. Yeah, they did. I never forget how bad some of them were in comparison to how they were. Yeah. That's what made them want. Let's before we get into golfers today, stuff we're seeing. I got some questions. How the hell did you get started on this journey and to get into golf stats and the numbers and really delve into where shots are going and take us to how the heck did you get started? I mean, what caused all this? Yeah, that's a good question, and it's one that I appreciate. As I called it, shot by shot and strokes lost and saved. It wasn't until the PGA Tour got involved that it became known as strokes gained, and everybody forgets that I came up with it. But I was a good athlete. In 1983, it was a long time ago, I got into a really good golf club. And so I said, I'm going to take this seriously, and I took a lesson with the pro, and I started to record the traditional stats that all the magazines, promoted, and that's all there were. And as you know, there were 5 stats: fairways hits, green and regulation, scrambling, sand saves, and number of putts per round. So here I am, keeping track, and not only, I can go through a litany on each one of those stats. Basically, they're yes/no answers to questions or numbers, percentages that are single, that are yes/no to a multidimensional game. So I started thinking, what could I do better? And coincidentally, in my job in a reinsurance firm, I had been experimenting with computer models to predict the relative frequency and severity of losses with the risks that we looked at. And, you know, there were no computers at our desks in those days, but, you know, a nice young lady would roll in a computer and a printer into my office, and I'd say, let's do this times this and subtract that and then average this, and she'd create the models. And then we'd run them, and it worked better than I ever thought it could. And all they were Excel spreadsheets, really. So in my trying to get better at golf and keeping the traditional statistics, I got nothing out of those, mainly because they're one-dimensional, but also the only comparative data was the PGA Tour. And for someone who started at a 14 handicap, my first handicap, to learn that I should be hitting 11 greens in regulation when I was only hitting 3 was a little bit depressing, and the rest of the numbers just didn't make sense. So I talked to my bride and said, you know what, I think I could revolutionize golf statistics. I'll create a model of how the game is played at scratch, at you know, zero differential from slope adjusted course rating, and then compare each shot to that model and come up with a value of every shot in golf. And so that's what I did. And for years you know, I made 3 presentations to the PGA Tour, and they finally got back to me and said, because the shot link was going to be perfect for this, and they finally got back to me and said, we're going to let the public tell us where they want us to go with ShotLink. And so I wrote back to the gentleman, who actually kind of became a friend, and I said, that would be like NASA launching a rocket and then saying, yeah, we're going to see where it goes. They spent millions and millions and millions in collecting all this data, yet they are still doing traditional stats, you know, but minute things. So anyway, that's how I got into it, and just kept going with it, and finally it's become the, you know, accepted way for everybody to analyze golf. And while I don't get credit for it, my business has been fairly successful.
It's been a huge part of my understanding of, you know, helping players get better. Just from my personal experience, one of the things that I like about the stuff that you do, you kind of alluded to it with when you were, I think you said, a 14 handicap. You know, I think, so we develop a lot of juniors and up-and-coming players, and everybody just goes by the PGA Tour averages that you can basically Google, right? Or you can pull up, you know, you can pull up on an app. And to me, that is frustrating. Or sometimes players, to me, don't often realize that they're better than they are in areas because they're comparing them. You know, a 14-year-old probably isn't going to hit as many greens as a guy that's 100th on the PGA Tour. You know?
Yeah,
or
no
so
question.
On, right? And then another thing, and I'd like you to expand upon it, is I don't know that players, or especially recreational golfers, realize that not every tour player hits it 6 feet from 150 yards, right? And that when they hit it 25 feet, it's an acceptable shot. And I fight that with young players coming up all the time. And you know, even actually, to be honest, a lot of tour players, you know, you'll get done and you kind of sit down there like, I didn't hit it very good, and this, that, and the other. And you're like, well, I mean, you hit it 20-something feet here. That's a pretty good shot. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, one thing, when we watch golf on TV, especially on the weekends, you're basically seeing the players who are at the top of their game. So it gives the audience, and, you know, myself included, a overblown sense of how the game is played. And the average PGA Tour player is, you know, not nearly as good as what you see on TV because they're missing cuts and all that. But it's very important for people to have accurate comparative data for their game. And every player who can, you know, play well enough to record a score, and that's usually what I look for as a starting point for using our program, that, you know, they have to be comfortable recording at least 9 holes while they play.
Yeah.
And everyone has strengths and weaknesses that stand out. And, I've been doing this a long time. I have never seen anyone from the top tour players with whom I've worked, many of whom came through you, down to the average golfer. Everybody has strengths and everybody has weaknesses. And if you can tell them what they are and why, and that's what our comparative data can do, then they can focus their improvement efforts where it'll do the most good and accelerate their improvement to where they want to go. And so our target handicaps, that go all the way up to, the average golfer, the 25 handicap, people can start up there and work their way down the ladder. Every time they reach or exceed their target, then they choose the next one down and the next one and the next one. And we've had I get some really good emails from amateurs out there that say, I started as a 19 and I'm now a 6.
Right. I always like to ask you this type of question. So when you look at, because you have such a large group of data, you've been doing it a long time. I'm one of those teachers that still, even though I teach a bunch of guys that play for a living, I still enjoy and spend a great deal of time, not just with juniors, but recreational golfers. To me, variety is a little bit of the spice of life. But when you look at golfers as they go from a guy that breaks, the guy getting started, he shoots 100 to breaking 90, 90 to 80, 80 to 70, 70 to a guy playing for a living. Are there some commonalities that as you go down and, as you get better each jump, where you see certain things improve, or there's some traits that, are there as somebody makes a jump, at each level of player?
Yes, yeah, there are. And as you know, I've written blogs over the years of breaking 80, breaking 90, and even down to, I think I did one on breaking par. And I point out the averages of what's going on at each of those levels, and how you have to understand those averages. And it typically is the relative frequency and severity of errors. Everyone in golf makes errors. It's just a matter of how many and how serious they are. And so the big error games are the big part of the game that contributes to errors. The biggest is driving, because people are trying to hit the ball a long way, and so there's a lot of volatility there. Putting is another. Short game, obviously, if you can't get the ball on the green when you're close in, you're going to make a lot of doubles. And I had an interesting thing. My son, after stewing golf as a child, when he had access to he had access to the lessons and this wonderful golf course and practice area, and he said, "Dad, golf's not a sport." And he played, all the majors, basketball, football, and lacrosse, but he got his group of high school friends from his football team that have stayed in touch, and they go on 2 golf trips a year. They're all out working, he's on Wall Street, they're all doing very good things. And they got back to me and said, "Sanders, can you do a breaking 100? And I'd never gone that high, because I didn't think people cared about it. And so I finally did the breaking 100 blog for my son's friends. But anyway, it's definitely identifying the frequency and severity of the bad shots.
So now you kind of talked about everybody hitting it so far. And I've had tour players that I've argued with about this, and I'm not going to get you in a fight here or anything, but, there's this thought that it's just about hitting it down there as far as you can. How do you factor that into errors? And, where's the benefit to, it's worth it just to hit it as far as you can and risk the error? You see where I'm going with that? Because I think because I don't disagree with people that distance is a huge, huge advantage, right? But if you can hit it 330, but to me, if you can hit it 330, but 3 out of 7 times you're going to re-tee or pitch out, then it isn't an advantage for you. So, from your point of view, how do we look at distance and, as we know it's an advantage, but still the need to be able to manage your misses and the severity of them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. The bomb and gouge came into
right.
play when everyone started. Well, like Tiger started hitting it all over the place, but he had the most incredible ability to recover shots. So when other people try to do it, sometimes worked and sometimes doesn't. The really long hitters out there that sometimes they blow a tournament away with, but they don't all the time. There's those tournaments where they're not quite hitting it as straight as they are far, and they don't make the cut. So that's what I have to talk to tour players with whom I work. Hitting it far is fine, but you got to keep it in play.
Right.
So the average tour player makes a driving error, hitting a no shot, as we call it in our program. It's behind a tree, it's under a bush. It requires an advancement to get it back into normal play, or the more costly errors of a penalty, that requires a drop, or lost ball out of bounds where they have to re-tee. They make that error, on average, on tour, 0.6 times per round. So
not even one time around.
Not even one time around. So when I go through a given tournament with, 4 rounds or only 2, and I see they're making 2 a round, well, that doesn't seem like a lot, and they don't remember it. But when I point out not only the number of them, but the strokes that they lost, usually there's a direct correlation between missing the cut by 1, missing the cut by 2, and those 4 or 5 extra shots lost in driving errors.
What about you look at the guy that wins, okay, the guy that wins during a week? You touched on, that's the guy playing his best. Do you see a correlation with the guy that wins has certain X stats tend to happen during a week, like driving, or is it accuracy, as far as approach shots, or is there just a variety of recipes that could lead you to a PGA Tour win?
Yeah, there's a similarity, and I don't do it as much anymore, but I used to record the winners' data every week, and I came up with some formulas, like you'll remember my 70% rule. First of all, they couldn't have any serious errors. That goes without saying.
Yeah.
But they'd hit center of their fairways, 70% of their greens in regulation, and they'd make 70% of their putts within 6 to 10 feet. No, within 5 to 10 feet, and their scrambling would be 70%. So if all those things averaged out to 70%, that was the winner profile.
That's interesting. Talk about putting. So putting's another area that I think all golfers could understand better from your perspective, because one, I think people are unrealistic with how many 10, 15, 20 footers they're supposed to make, right? And even professional golfers, especially young pros coming up that I teach, like, we'll how you play, and then sitting there and you're kind of going through the interview process, and they're like, I don't make enough 25 footers. Like, how many 25 footers do you think you're supposed to make, right?
Yeah.
And then if they're hitting it, or they talk about that they're 3-putting too many times, but they're hitting it 50 feet a lot. Talk a little bit about, hey, what are the best players and the ones that are excelling doing, make percentage, and, where are they making all of their putts? And then also, where is there a place, or is there a range, Peter, that you could practice at, a distance, to where if you started making more of them, you'd really pick up a good bit of, for lack of a better word, strokes gained on the field?
Yeah. And putting is 40% of the game at every level of the game. As scores go up, so do numbers of putts from, as a percentage of the score. So in the presentations that I make to, coaches and instructors, and, you've sat through a number of them, and they're really boring, But what I like to do is to have a little quiz at the end and say, let's see how much we, who are in the business of helping people become better, and, we eat, breathe, and live golf, how good are you at knowing what the difference is between the average PGA Tour player and the average golfer, 15 to 19 handicap? And so with putting, I have these two stats. I say, okay, where is the 50% make distance on the PGA Tour versus the 15 to 19 handicap? And of course, as you move away from the hole, at 3 feet, you make 99% of them, 4 feet, 5 feet. But where is the 50% make the distance? And I'm sure you know it because you're steeped in this. For the tour players, it's 8 feet. That's average. Everyday tour player will make 50% of their 8-footers. Now, the people that we see winning tournaments.
But Peter, don't you think if we ask the average person what percentage of 8-footers a PGA Tour player make, they would all say it'd be like 80%.
Yes, because that's what they see on TV.
People would be they would be way off on that number to me if you ask the average person.
I just did this for the Swing U group of 20 people in a room, and they're not, they're in the golf business, but they're not, steeped in it the way you and I are. And the guesses of what the 50% was like 12 to 15 feet. But anyway, so the average golfer, so it's 8 feet for the PGA Tour. The average golfer is 4.6 feet. They make 50%. And they think they make it at 8 and 10. And so what happens is they end up three putting because they try too hard to make the 7, 8, 10 footers. And then I go to what is the 2.0 make range? In other words, as you move away from the hole, your 1 putt, 2 putt, 2 putts, 3 putts, that average 2.0, what distance is that? And for the tour player, it's 35 feet. That means they 2 putt 90-some% of the time, and their 1 putts and their 3 putts offset each other. So what do you think that distance is for the average golfer? You probably know it anyway. It's 16 feet. And, everybody, most of the instructors that use shot by shot have a good idea of that, like you would because you have. The instructors that don't are saying, 25 feet. The average golfer needs to be being very careful when they get outside 10 feet, not the 3 putt.
The thing to me is, like, if you use that information from a teaching perspective, right? And we're talking about we're not talking about a tour player here, and I'll get into that in a minute, but like, it shows you that if you use those stats and you can show a player, it shows you the importance of something like when you're going to work on part of your lesson, the importance of speed work when it comes to putting, right? Yeah. And I've had that. I've used your information. You've helped me before with certain tour players, and you're like, hey, I mean, guy's great inside 4 or 5 feet now, but, he's got to get better at speed control from 25 feet because because the 3 putts are up and so forth like that. Like, to me, understanding this information is very, very valuable. And how you structure instruction and also for the player to use it to understand how to structure their practice.
Yeah, and you asked me what distance would be a good practice. Well, there's two skills in putting as far as I'm concerned. One is direction, and that's short putts, and the other is speed, and that's lag putts. And so I recommend that everybody work pretty hard on their short putts, and that means 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot, and 6 feet putts, and become as proficient as you can. And I've got the putting skills test on the website that helps people do that and gives them a handicap, and they just keep track of their distances of practice. And then for speed control, I recommend 30 feet because it's the middle of like 20 to 50, and if you're proficient from 30 feet, then you can gauge everything as a percentage of that. So I tell people, you're going out to play in a tournament on greens that you haven't putted before, put tees down 30 feet apart on some fairly flat section of the green and hit 2 or 3 balls back and forth until you can close your eyes and hit it that far.
I love that. And I mean, I teach all facets of the game. And to me, and maybe this is because coming up underneath, spending a bunch of time with you under Hank Johnson and Wayne Flynn, when I structure a person's putting practice and routine, I structure a lot of 3, 4, 5-footers, but especially some short putts where it's straight. They learn to get it on line. And then everything else is out 25 to 40 feet, just working on speed control, trying to, do ladder drills and stuff like that. Because I think if you can learn to get it on line 3, 4, 5 feet, you'll make your share of those. And then if you can have consistently improve and be aware of your speed control, I think you'll improve your putting. That's always been my belief.
Yeah, and it works.
So we've talked about driving, we've talked about putting. I want to cover 2 more things. Let's talk about wedges and approaches, and where can folks, like from 100, 125 or 100 in with their wedges, what are the tour players doing, and where can recreational golfers use this information to improve their game? And then I want to talk about short game, chipping and pitching right around the green.
Yeah, okay. First, I've shared it with you, but there was a myth came out on, I call it a myth, that the proximity to the hole was the the holy grail of approach shots, and that everybody on tour and everywhere should be, you got to get that proximity to the hole. And so it came up with one of my favorite tour players in our meeting together, and you know who that is. And
yep.
And the entourage, the people around him were saying he's hitting enough greens. He's not hitting it close enough. Shouldn't he be attacking the pins? And I knew the answer, but I didn't want to just blurt out and maybe misstep. So I said, well, I'll do a study and get back to you. So I did this. This was in 19. This was 3 or 4 years ago. And I took the top 10 players on tour and I compared their proximity to the hole to their strokes gained approach. And only one of them was in the top 10 of proximity to the hole, but all of them were in the top 10 of strokes gained approach. And then I did a study of if you were to miss a green versus hitting it to the average distance of just inside 35 feet, that the average approach shot that hits the green is 35 feet, you would have to hit all of your 11.5 greens that you hit to 8 feet closer to make up for missing that green. So, and then finally I said at the end of my presentation, I said, and does anybody know who led the tour in proximity to the hole last year? And they all looked at each other and went, no. I said, yeah. You know why? He finished 165th on tour in the money.
Right. That shows you that there's more to the numbers.
But the point is, hit the greens. And this is for tour players and average players. When the opportunity is there with the right club and the right circumstances, certainly knock the flagstick down. But otherwise, get the ball on the green.
No, yeah, but I love what you said about hitting the greens, because I've had multiple tour players that have played phenomenal golf, and guys that have won have told me all I did that week was I didn't feel like I one in particular didn't feel great with my game, so I tried to take advantage of par fives, and then unless I had a wedge, I just tried to hit it. I tried to hit it to 25, 35 feet, correct side of the hole, and next thing you know, I've got 2-shot lead and I win. Right, but I think that there's a common thread with that. Now go ahead to short game. Sorry, I interrupted.
The same quiz that I give all my instructors is interesting in the short game. So the PGA Tour average of hitting and pitching around the green is, in my program, has always been an acceptable or a good shot is to get it within 5 feet of the hole. And the PGA Tour players do that 46% of the time on average. That's the 2021 tour statistics that I compiled. And the 15 to 19 average golfer only does it 15% of the time. By contrast, the PGA Tour player will make an error, an error meaning miss the green and taking 4 or more shots to hole out. So, they miss the green, then they chip it on and don't one putt, they'll only do that 2% of their shots, whereas the average golfer will do it 4 times as often. 8% of their shots are errors in chipping and pitching. So it shows how important the short game and, again, frequency and severity of errors are. And then the sand game, as you know, is way harder for the average golfer. And so our barometer for a good shot there is percent to 8 feet. And the PGA Tour does it 48% of the time, and the average golfer, again, does it 15% of the time. So that's an indication of how much harder it is to get it close. But the errors are astounding. PGA Tour will make an error 3% of the time, and the average golfer 27%, almost 1 in every 3 shots from the stand for the average golfer is an error.
So, I mean, and I think that as we wrap this up, to me, what I've always gotten out of our work together and the times you've been able to share information with me is that for all golfers, reducing the number of errors and the severity of the errors is really one of the biggest keys to success. And so, like, from a golf teacher, my point of view is always to figure out in the golf swing or in the approach to the game what's causing those errors and the severity of the errors and attack that. And if I do that, I'm going to make the player better, but the information that you provide helps us find out, like, where are those errors being made. But is that a pretty accurate assessment from your point of view, of what I've taken from our work, that it's about reducing errors and the severity of the errors if you want to get better?
Yep. The frequency and severity of errors plays the biggest part of a player's scoring profile, far more than do the average and even good shots that they hit influence because they could hit a shot to 4 feet and miss the putt. That doesn't
right.
But if they hit it out of bounds, it's out of bounds. So it's always the frequency and severity of errors, and it's not always in the same place. As I always say, we're all snowflakes. We find our individual, unique way to shoot our number.
Peter, awesome stuff. Thanks for taking the time. Double duty. Last week sitting in with me on the Dew Sweepers. This week sitting down to take. I've been wanting to have you on, and thanks for all the help over the years and the friendship. And I mean, you've provided some. I don't always share it with all of my players. Like I'll ask you to run a report, and a lot of times I never share it with players. Don't even know I'm doing it. It's just information for me, right, to help coach them.
Yeah.
But it's been such valuable insight, and in fact, I'll share this. Like in 2018 going into 19, I was working with Lucas Glover. I asked you to run some stats for me, and you said, hey, great ball striker, you need to get better at up and down percentage, right, and scrambling. And it was something that I hadn't particularly focused on. And, heck, that was the focus of that whole year. In every practice, we did some drills that were replicated what was going on the golf course. And he made the tour championship, and he finished top 10 in scrambling. But like, to me, that that's how what you do and coaches work together and find where the path to success is.
Yeah, that was fun. I enjoyed all the players that you brought me. But as you're working with these young elite players, and you have a question or you want me to take a look with any of your tour players, I'll always be happy to do it.
Oh, I know that. Peter, I appreciate you sitting in. Thanks for let everybody out there also know how to find you to get more information on your services and stuff like that. Because, look, if you're listening to this, especially if you're a coach developing players, any skill level of player, or you're a coach coaching PGA Tour players or college players, Peter's got some wonderful information. Peter, let people know how to find you.
Well, you can find my blog on shotbyshot.com under About Us, and I've got, a storehouse of articles and blogs, and you can read. And the same unique stream down data entry and analysis is available at Swing U, and as a bonus, people get the distance finding app, the GPS distance app to go along with it, as well as these new Straka green readings. So Swing U's got it going, and they're using my shot-by-shot data analysis.
Awesome, Peter. Everybody check it out. Peter, thanks
Thanks, Tony. Anytime.
Thanks for listening to this edition of the Tour Coach. I want to take a minute and thank Cordy Walker and Golf Science Lab, as well as my sponsors Srixon, Buick, Bushnell, and Vineyard Vines for helping make all of this possible and helping me share my insights with you. If you like what you've heard, why don't you check out more on the Dew Sweepers channel on YouTube, as well as the Dew Sweeper on Instagram, or go to dewsweepersgolf.com to find out more about my teaching, my travels, and where you can find out more about me.